PhD student in the Faculty of Divinity in the University of Cambridge. My research considers the orientation of women's interfaith activities within the contemporary British public sphere. I'm pleased to welcome my guest today, Laura Marks.
Hello, lovely to be here.
Laura Marks is a policy advisor and interfaith social activist whose work focuses on faith, gender, and social cohesion. In 2005, she founded Mitzvah Day, and she is also the co-founder of women's interfaith organisations Nisa Nashim and the Women's Faith Forum. She's a regular speaker on BBC Two Pause for Thought, and in 2023 she received a CBE for her services to interfaith relations, Holocaust education and commemoration, and women's empowerment. Thank you so much for joining me today for this discussion about Interfaith Futures. So I'll start with my first question. You're responsible for Mitzvah Day, which is taking place for the 20th time later this month. So I wondered what was your vision when you started out and how has it evolved? And does this tell us anything about how the sort of general interfaith landscape has changed?
So it's lovely to be here. Thank you for interviewing me. Mitzvah Day came out of a belief that I had that we could all do something. You know, many people set up charities because something bad has happened to them. And I was very lucky. Nothing terrible had happened to me. So I found that the cause that I got into, the cause that Mitzvah Day is all about, is enabling other people to do things that they are passionate about. So Mitzvah Day, mitzvah literally means a commandment, but it's used to mean a good deed. So Mitzvah Day is a day of good deeds. And I found the idea when we lived in California 25 years ago. And the idea being that on one day, you really celebrate the good that people can do hands-on. And it very quickly became a day when Jewish people, it was set up to be Jewish, but it was always set up to be a day that Jewish people could reach out to other people. So whether we were reaching out to a local non-Jewish charity, whether we were reaching out to a mosque or a gurdwara or a church and saying, come and do it with us, the opportunities to do things hands-on are there right across the board. So whether you are cleaning up a park, you're filling a food bank, you are going and visiting old people, which is actually my favorite activity on Mitzvah Day, whatever it is, you can do something to make the world better physically. Go out, do something, and do it with other people. So the doing it with other people is integral to Mitzvah Day. Now, when I started Mitzvah Day, I was much less, my background's in marketing and advertising. But when I started Mitzvah Day, I hadn't really thought through, and I think the world was a different place too, in terms of how this fitted into the interfaith sort of arena. I wasn't really thinking in those terms. I was thinking about something Jewish and positive and inclusive. But I think that now, 20 years, almost 20 years on, a Mitzvah Day is well established in pretty much every mainstream Jewish community in the UK and also in about 30 other countries. This far on, I realize that we need Mitzvah Day because not only does it operate at a local level, pulling people together, but it's also very positive. And right now, the Jewish community really need it. You know, there's a lot of people telling me this year and last year, but both years really, that they don't want to be seen doing something Jewish. And that's a real phenomenon we've got going on. There's so much anxiety and fear. And I'm not saying that the Jews are the only community feeling that. I think the Muslim communities are also feeling that, but the Jews are feeling it really acutely. It's not a hierarchy. And the idea of going out on the street visibly and loudly Jewish is quite daunting for some people. And the good thing about Mitzvah Day is it's so positive. You know, we're not asking for money. You get away from all the Jewish stereotypes about money and Jews. It's about being positive, reaching out to our neighbors, giving back, and being part of a giving society, which we really need right now. So that was my sort of start point into the interfaith world. And I know now, when I look at it, it's a Jewish-led model of interfaith. It's Jews leading this, and there's all sorts of models where a particular faith community leads an initiative. I've no problem with that at all. And we reach out to our local church food bank. We reach out to our local Gurdwara who are serving lunch to people. Or we are going and helping a mosque with their cleanup of the local park, whatever it is. It's an opportunity. It gives people a vehicle. It gives people a way to say, we're here, we want to do good. We do good year round. It's not something people only do one, faith communities, this is what we do, right? We do it every day. And we want to do it with our neighbours because we want to reach out.
Thank you. In my research, I've heard a lot of people express the view that women's interfaith organizations are more resilient in times like this than mixed gender groups. Does this ring true with your experiences in Nisa Nashim and the Women's Faith Forum? And if so, why do you think that might be?
So the short answer is yes. But if I take a step back, in about 2011, I did a commission for the Jewish community about the role of women in leadership, which, as you would expect, was pretty much like in other, particularly minority faith communities, where not necessarily through religion, actually, or through scriptures, but through tradition, through culture, through family pressures, through historical norms, the women have taken different roles, and those roles have not been leadership roles. And it's sort of the norm in the faith communities. It's the norm everywhere, but it's the norm particularly in the faith communities. We are behind on this one. And a lot of people joke when they see me say that, because they look at me and other sort of strong, often Jewish women and say, well, how can you say that? But it's true. There is no doubt that it's true in all of the faith communities. It's deeply embedded. So after I had done that, I was working there for both on Mitzvah Day and on thinking more and more about the role of women. And it was the obvious thing to do was to set up Nisa Nashim, because Nisa Nashim means women in Arabic and Hebrew. And so it's women and women. And we chose the name because it was one of the many, many demonstrations of how similar Jewish and Muslim people are. We even have the same language in so many ways, same culture, same history of immigration, same patriarchy, same food, lots of the rituals are the same, same prophets, same back, anyway. So it, and so much tension between the two communities. And, here we are in 2024 and things are pretty dire. But even when we started in about 2016, 2017, things were really bad. It's not new, this is just much worse now. And so Julie Siddiqui and I, we set it up. We wanted to do something that empowered women. And we wanted to do something which was about bringing the two communities together. And I'm not sure that one was higher up our priorities than the other. They're both really big priorities. And doing it together seemed like just such a brilliant idea. And I think it is a brilliant idea, actually. And we set up these groups all around the country and we started doing all sorts of things together. And the last 2 years have been horrific, right? Absolutely awful. And there's so much pressure to disengage. And I think the pressure is greater on the Muslim women than it is on the Jewish women, for all sorts of reasons. But either way, both lots of women feel silenced, feel unheard, feel that it's really difficult to engage with the other side. And that the moment you get into the politics of the Middle East, the moment you get into, yes, but Hamas did that, yes, but Israel did that, the moment you get into that, you're sunk. Because you go round and round in circles. If there was a solution by now that was easy, someone would have found it. And we're unlikely to find it in our meetings on X, Y, or Z, whatever we're talking about. So mostly it's divisive. But what we do talk about and what we can share is we can share grief, anger, pain, how it's impacting our kids, how it's impacting our communities, how it's tearing families apart. We can talk about despair. We can talk about hope, kindness, reaching out, similarities. So, you know, there are things we can talk about around the conflict, but the conflict itself, you get nowhere. And I do think that all of those things that I was talking about, they're very female. You know, they are the sorts of things women talk about. How are your kids dealing with this? How did you feel when your children couldn't wear their blazer on their way to school? How did you feel when your daughter was on the bus and got her hijab tweaked? You know, all those things, they're the sorts of things that women talk about, but they're real. And they are as real as anything else that the men are talking about, but we're talking about it metaphorically and physically with our arms around each other.
Thank you. And then finally, at the recent Women's Faith Forum meeting in Parliament, I noticed there were significantly more young people present than is often the case in interfaith settings. And I wondered if this is something you've consciously cultivated, and how can we do more to ensure that future generations are actually engaging in interfaith encounter?
So let me explain about the Women's Faith Forum. So you know, it's interesting because Mitzvah Day is a Jewish-led model of interfaith, okay? Nisa Nashim is a partnership, Jewish and Muslim. I realized a few years ago that actually there was an opportunity for a multi-faith model as well. And the Women's Faith Forum is that. It's a multi-faith model of interfaith action. And increasingly, actually, I don't use the word interfaith. Increasingly, I start thinking about social cohesion, because that's what we're doing, right? We're building a stronger, more resilient, more caring, more connected society. So the Women's Faith Forum is 6 women. We are all sort of relatively well-known and active in our own communities. We don't claim to speak for our communities, but we claim to be of our communities, right? So I am very much of the Jewish community. I don't represent it. There's all sorts of people who are very different from me, but I understand the Jewish community. And it's the same with the other women. And we are deliberately a partnership. We don't have a chair. We don't have a, you know, we are a partnership. And we set up to see what we could do collectively as women and as people from all the different major faith backgrounds, what we could do to make the world better. So we don't spend a lot of time talking about in our scripture, we do this and we do that, unless it's helpful in terms of giving us ideas about things we can do. Our focus is on changing the world: food poverty, isolation, hate crime, extremism, you know, all of those things, which are all crises of today. We've had quite a lot of events before we launched in Parliament this year in February. We've had 2 events in Parliament, which was a long preamble to your question. But yes, we did have quite a lot of young people. And I think for lots of reasons. I think partly because it's less contentious. So we actually a few years ago set up a students' Nisa Nashim. It was very difficult, and that was long before October the 7th. It was very difficult because students have very strong opinions and are often activists and don't necessarily want to look for the similarities. They are often looking for the differences because they are passionate about their cause. And within the Women's Faith Forum, we are very, very committed to doing things together. So it was interesting. We didn't, at our first event, even though it was in February this year, we didn't talk about the conflict, which would have been the obvious thing to talk about. We chose instead to talk about gendered Islamophobia and gendered anti-Semitism, which are outcomes of the conflict, but get you away from the conflict. They're things that are real, and they were also things that people from other faith communities were amazingly well disposed to come along and be supported, be allies. So why do young people come? I think maybe because it's in Parliament. Quite a few of them met their own MPs there. We've got Preet Kaur Gill was one of the MPs who came, and there was a group from her own constituency. I think being in Parliament makes it something interesting that young people would want to come to. I think it's not contentious in the way that Nisa Nashim can feel. It's not led by one community. A lot of young people get involved in Mitzvah Day. So pretty much a lot of Jewish societies on campus do it. Pretty much every Jewish school does it. You get young people in that way. But I think the Women's Forum event had a sort of cachet and interest about it. It felt big. And by feeling big, I think that young people maybe feel that it's something worth their while investing in, because young people need to be involved in the big things, right? They need to be involved in the vision for the future. And so maybe, and it wasn't deliberately setting out to do that, but I think it's a massive bonus that if we can find ways to bring young people in and get them to feel inspired, and as women, as young women, to see that they can do things with people they wouldn't necessarily otherwise meet. They wouldn't necessarily otherwise have around to their houses or to their communities. There's something hugely positive and hopeful about that.
Thank you so much. That's my last question. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure, and I wish you the best of luck with your research. Thank you.